Hi, everybody. Welcome to Stressbusters. Welcome to the workshop here. If you can hear me, that's a good thing. So there isn't a video option here. We won't be turning videos on. You should be able to see my video. But there is a chat box on the right-hand side of your screen that you can use. So if you see the chat box there, give me a hello. Oh, awesome. All right. Thanks. Hi, Donna, Lori. Hi, Polly, Alex, Michael, Jonathan. Excellent. Hello. Excellent. We got people familiar here with the chat box. Fantastic. Donna, I've given you the option to turn on your microphone if you wish. If there's anything that you want to say, and we've got a few minutes, so I'll do that.
Thanks, Amy. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah, loud and clear.
So we have quite a few new CAF members that are joining us tonight that were just enrolled recently at CFRC Hamilton.
Fantastic.
They'll learn a lot from you and quite a few family members.
Okay. Would any of these be the same that attended, I want to say, was it mental fitness? What workshop?
They have been...
Oh, Danielle's. They attended Danielle's
yes.
workshop. Is
Yes.
that right? I lost you.
Uh-oh.
Hi, I lost you there for a second. You're
Okay.
back now. Would they have been on Danielle's workshop?
Yes, they were there.
Gotcha. Fantastic. One thing that I will mention right now is that there is an activity that I'm going to do where you'll need a pen and a piece of paper. So if you don't have one handy, you've got a few minutes here. If you want to just grab a pen and a scrap piece of paper, you do not need to hand this in. It's for your own personal use, but it will be really helpful for the activity that we're going to do. So for anybody that's here, feel free to do that. We have a few minutes before we're going to start. So I am going to kind of, play around with the chat box here. I get people used to it. It's a kind of a chance to practice. So my name shows up as facilitator 4. My name is Amy, but I go by facilitator 4. So hi, Carrie. So feel free to post there in the chat box. If you did anything fun today, it was a beautiful day, at least in London. If you did anything fun today, feel free to type that in the chat box. If you got up to anything interesting or exciting or relaxing, that counts too. Assignments, a morning walk. Oh, we've got Caitlin all the way from Cold Lake. All right, that's awesome. Welcome. I have to remember, right? This is a national platform here. I've been doing a bunch of workshops for our local units, but this is my first one that's on the national list here, so that's really fun. Easton went for a run with the dog. Hopefully earlier in the day. Easton, where are you from? What was it pretty hot there where you are? It got hot there this afternoon, but it was nice this morning. Okay, perfect. So you're local, and it was beautiful for that. Nice. Looks like we got lots of runners and walkers in the group here today. If anybody has just joined the group, one thing I want to mention is if you can grab a pen and a piece of paper, we are going to use it for an activity. You still got a couple minutes. If you've also just joined in with us, feel free to find the chat box and type a message. You can say hi, give me a thumbs up, say hello. I've been asking people if they did anything fun or interesting today, and so you're also welcome to share that as well. Almost 20 degrees in Cold Lake. Okay, that would probably be a good thing. Are the driving ranges open? Was it at a driving range that you hit golf balls, Vinny? Okay, that's a good activity. There's something you can go out and do. Keep your distance easily enough. And it looks like most people aren't even onto that yet. Very nice. Nathaniel, I have to agree with you. I'm really a fan of this Demio. I've used both, but I really like the way it organizes things. It's really seamless for the facilitator. I like having the chat box, and I've got more in store for you. Wait till you see what it can do. It's got some pretty nifty features. Yeah, so Caitlin, here in Ontario, things are just starting to open up. We still have quite a few cases. So things are golf courses just this week, I think, are starting to open up. Oh, welcome. Jen's in London. Jen, I'm in London too. That's great. So Joanne is new to Demio as well. Okay, we'll have a few people where Demio might be new. So far, you're doing great. It's pretty simple, right? You just type in your name, email, and boom, you're in. It's really nice not having to do a download software, another program on your computer, right? Welcome, Richard from Mississauga and Owen from Elmira. Excellent. Okay. Another one from Mississauga. That's fantastic. We've still got, I'm going to give it 2 more minutes. We're up to 35 people. If you're just joining in, if you have a second, grab a pen and a piece of paper, because we will be doing an activity a little bit later on. You're also welcome to locate the chat box here and just type us a hello. I've got a bunch of people sharing where they're from. I think that's awesome. So feel free to say hi, tell us where you're from. That's great. Hi, Brenda and Rod, also in London. Awesome, local, thank you. We got Oakville here. Kevin and Milton, welcome. Guillaume from Ottawa, excellent. Okay, Rhonda, the furthest so far we have is Vancouver, so that would be you, Rhonda. Hey, my pleasure. You know what? I appreciate all you guys being on here. It's great. Rose in Toronto, welcome. I'll be back in 1 second. Yeah, tonight we are going to finish by 8 o'clock. So it's, 50 minutes, an hour tops. You will absolutely by 8 o'clock. I have a rule. It's called start on time, finish on time. So it's 7 o'clock. We're going to get started. Thank you everybody for being here. My name is Amy Dolman. I'm the Health Promotion Manager based out of London, Ontario, and I provide support normally to Southwestern Ontario, and on a day like today, providing support across Canada, internationally, I guess, potentially. So thank you all for being here. Also here providing support today, Carrie Sanford is the Health Promotion Admin Assistant. So she'll be active in the chat box. If anybody has questions, she might help me out from time to time. If you have any issues or troubleshooting, she can provide information. So tonight we're going to talk about stress. It'll be an hour or maybe slightly less, but certainly I can promise you no more. So welcome to tonight's workshop. One thing I just want to start off with is to let you know, where is this information coming from? So the PSP Health Promotion Program, it's a shared project between Canadian Forces Health Services and PSP. So Health Services develops the content, the program materials, does all the back-end research. All the content is going to be evidence-based and based on scientific information and evidence. And then it's the PSP side of the house that does the facilitation and the implementation. So across the country, there are other PSP health promotion staff, such as myself, mostly often located on bases and wings. In London, we have a large reserve area that we support. And so we provide the same programs across the country, similar programs anyways, with maybe minor adaptations. So that's where your program material is coming from tonight. And just a few sort of admin points before we start. So this presentation is the intellectual property of the Department of National Defense. Any reproduction or retransmission is prohibited. This webinar is being recorded and they have plans to put it up on a YouTube channel. So just keep that in mind. Active participation is certainly encouraged, and anything that you type in the chat box is not recorded or put on there. It's only information shared over the microphone, the presentation, the slides. So unless you turn on your microphone and are talking, or turn on a video, then which you can't do unless I enable it, then the information you share would not be contained in that presentation. But it means that down the road, you'll be able to check out all of the different webinars and workshops that have taken place and the future ones to come. I will mention that some of the topics we discuss on these webinars can be sensitive in nature, so just keep that in mind. If you do have children in the house, just ask for parental discretion. And I will also just keep in mind that if people do share personal things today in the chat box or otherwise, that we keep that information. What happens in the Demio webinar stays in the Demio webinar, if we could say it that way. Last but not least, there is some very important resources and phone numbers that we do have available. So I'm going to be posting a copy of this slide as a handout in a little bit. So if there is a resource that would be helpful to you during this time, these are some of the different phone numbers, resources, and I encourage you to reach out and contact these numbers for assistance. So last but not least, a few key points. One thing is if we do lose connection, that can happen from time to time. If for some reason I disappear, just sit tight. It usually takes 15, 30 seconds and then I'll be back. If for some reason I can't make it back in, I have Carrie here. She would let the group know that we're going to have to end the session. This hasn't happened yet, but it's good to be prepared. If your connection cuts out, again, same thing, just be patient. It'll let you back in. It won't kick you out, or it won't stop you from coming back into the session. Microphone settings. So you'll notice that everybody's microphone by default is turned off, and your video, and I'll leave it that way for the workshop just because it means that way there's no interruption with sound quality. At the very end, if there was a question that someone wanted to ask, I could turn your microphone on if you need to do it that way. If you're on a cell phone or a tablet, there isn't a microphone option, so you'd have to use the chat box. Now, most of you have already discovered the chat box here, so that's fantastic. Welcome. So what I'd like to do is just to make sure everyone is familiar with it, in the chat box, I also want to show you where the emojis are. So in the chat box, it may be slightly different for cell phones, I'm not quite sure, but you'll see a little smiley face. So what I'd like you to do right now is if you can find the smiley face, give me a thumbs up or a hand clap or one of those symbols in there. I feel like the emojis give you the ability to kind of participate and interact. They're really handy. Okay, you guys are awesome. Look at these coming at me. Fantastic. So these are something you can use throughout the workshop. Like if you had a question, you could raise your hand. If you kind of agree with something or you like something, you give me a thumbs up. If something doesn't really sound right, you could give me a thumbs down. So you're welcome to use the chat box during the presentation to kind of sort of interact with myself and the other people that are here for the workshop. So fantastic, we got the hang of that. Now I also want to introduce you to the polls, and we have the ability here to conduct polls, and some of them are private, as in only I get to see the results. Some of them are shared, where the audience gets to see, but they don't know who specifically picked what answer, they just get the overall picture. So let's pick out a poll here that I would like to share. So here's one that I'm going to ask. I'd like to know, what is your affiliation with the CAF community? Are you currently a serving member? Are you a veteran, a family member, a civilian employee of DND or CFMWS, or other? So if you can select just which answer best suits you. Fantastic. So I can see that about, we're up to 90% of our audience has filled out the poll. You guys can see the answers. You don't know specifically who said what. So that's awesome. Thank you very much for answering that. We do kind of, in Ottawa, they'd like to collect the stats and know who's participating in the courses. So that's great. And now you'll notice now you don't have the chat box. So if you go up to the top of your screen, you can see chat is in lighter gray letters. So you can switch back over to the chat box by just clicking on chat. Fantastic. And I've got another poll here that I want to ask you. So I do, because we are based in Southwestern Ontario, we are collecting some local stats for Southwestern Ontario. So what I'd like to know is that if you are from Southwestern Ontario, which area are you from? If you're from the London or area, surrounding area, Hamilton area, or Windsor area. And if you're not from any of these areas, or in addition to, please jump in the chat box and let us know where you're from. I'd love to see where people are from in today's workshop. A number of you have done that already. So feel free to type it again, or if you haven't told us where you're coming from, then please jump in the chat box, tell us where you're at. Okay, fantastic. We've got quite the area here. This is awesome. Awesome. Okay, so thank you very much for sharing that. You've gotten the hang of the polls, you've gotten the hang of the chat box. We are ready to move on. So today we're going to be talking about stress, and one of the things that's important with stress is just having ways and strategies to manage our stress and keep it in check. And I always kind of like to get a sense of the audience, the people that I'm talking to and working with. So what I'd like to know is, perhaps if you don't mind, I'd like to know what's one activity that helps you manage stress, and jump in the chat box and share something you're comfortable with. Okay, we got all different types of strategies. Awesome. Okay, so I see a variety of things. And one of the things I notice is that some of the activities that you've listed are things that you can't do right now. So it'll be interesting to see how you've adapted to those situations. What are ways that you have come up with that when you can't go to the gym, how are you managing stress? We see, okay, home gym, home PT, awesome, fantastic. So what this shows us is there's so many different ways to be managing stress. We really need to be aware of what is it that works for us, what are we comfortable with, and making sure we have more than just one strategy, because one strategy is not going to be enough. We need a couple different tools and strategies for managing stress. So the next thing I'd like you to do is to think about what are some of your stressors. And if you've got that pen and paper handy, just jot some of these down. And I think sometimes we know that we're stressed, we feel stressed, we recognize some of the side effects and the symptoms of stress, but we don't often take enough time to actually sort of sit with ourselves and go, okay, what is going on? Why am I feeling like this? We might have a few ideas, but unless we actually sit down and really think about it and give it the time and attention that it needs, we might not even realize why we're feeling stressed. So what I'd like you to do is just write down as many things that come to your mind as possible. There's no wrong answer. You don't have to share this with anybody. You don't have to send me a picture. This is only for your personal use. But it's just a chance for you to take whatever's kind of going on in your head and say, okay, I'm going to take it from my head and I'm just going to put it down on this piece of paper. And we'll come back to it a little bit later on in the workshop. So take another 15, 20 seconds and just jot down anything that comes to mind about what are your stressors. Okay, so what is stress? Well, one definition is we can describe it as an imbalance between demands of a situation and our own personal coping resources. It's when the pressure exceeds our perceived ability to cope. And that's usually when we think of stress, we think about the negative side of stress. But in fact, there's different types of stress. Not all stress is bad. Stress really is only negative when it becomes overwhelming or too much. So here is a stress curve. I think it's fitting. We've got a COVID curve. Well, here's our stress curve. I think flattening the curve could also be applied to stress. So if we don't have anything going on, if there's no pressure, if there's no responsibility, if there's no urgency to get things done, we can be pretty lazy, right? We sleep in, we aren't very efficient, we're not focused, our performance overall can be low. Now, if we add a little bit of stress, a little bit more pressure, we're more productive, right? We're more alert, we're functioning at a higher level. And in fact, add a little bit more stress and we can hit that optimal performance, right? We're just, getting everything done, we're on top of things, we're organized, we're diligent, we're on top of things. Now, it's not a straight line though that goes on forever. You can't just keep adding stress, and then expecting people's performance to get better and better and better. Do more, right? Lots of workplaces and companies, I think, sometimes try that. Hey, let's just put more stress and people will do better. But at a certain point, then it starts to fall off. So when it becomes too much stress, now we tip the scales, our performance decreases. So now we're seeing maybe more anxiety, we start to make more mistakes, we're not as organized, we're feeling overwhelmed, our performance decreases. And if you add a bit more stress, then we decrease our performance even more. So really managing stress, it's not about trying to eliminate all of our stressors. We don't necessarily need to be stress-free, but we need to find out, okay, how can I kind of keep things in check? I can't be running at 120% all the time because eventually I'm gonna tip the scale and burn out. How do I kind of navigate that middle zone of optimal and then having a bit of a break in between those types of stages? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. What are some strategies to kind of keep things in stress, keep things in check without necessarily eliminating all of our stressors? So when it comes to sources of stress, there's two main categories that we're going to talk about. One is external and the other is internal. So let's take a closer look at some of these external stressors. So these can be anything in our physical environment. It could be noise, could be crowds, maybe not so much right now, maybe isolation could be a physical stressor or an environmental stressor. Could be cluttered surroundings, maybe the temperature, cold, heat, humidity, bright lights, lack of light, confined spaces or low heights, lack of windows. So these could all be potentially physical or environmental stressors. There can also be social stressors. So these are related to relationships, and that could be our personal relationship. It could be a work type of relationship, could be social situations, parties, meeting people, strangers, people at the grocery store, people, your next door neighbor. Could be people who are rude or aggressive, people who are unreliable. So these are social settings or types of situations. So I thought I might ask you a quick question about this one. I've listed some of these types of social stressors, and I was going to ask, now these will be public, but which one can you relate to the most right now? So is it a stressor from work relationships, a personal relationship, and that being your partner, spouse, or significant other? Is it your family? Is it your kids, your parents, your in-laws, sometimes known as outlaws? Or is it more social, strangers, your neighbor, people in the community, or something else? So which kind of relationship right now is perhaps the most contributing the most to your stress? Okay, so we see family, partners, and work are all very close together. There's really only 1 or 2 points separating them. Okay, very interesting to see. Thank you for sharing that. So external stressors can also be institutions or organizations. If you, depending on where you work, maybe there's a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy, policies, procedures, rules. Anybody that works in D&D, or I'm sure many organizations, procurement policies can be rather cumbersome. So all of these things can be organizational or work-related stressors. Now, there's also what we would call as major life events. These can be stressors, and they can be things like getting married or having a child. So they're not necessarily all negative, but when there's a major change in our lifestyle, that can be a source of stress. Could be divorce or solo parenting, could be death of a loved one. Changes in life circumstances, even when they're positive, can be a stress. Now, really, I put that image of the COVID there in a web because it's amazing how one change has so many offsets, so many different implications, right? The web of everything around us. So right now, all of us are going through a major life event change. The entire world as we know it, things have changed. How we do our grocery shopping, how we interact with people, how we walk down the sidewalk is different. So there's these changes in our lifestyles. Now, there's also what we would call daily hassles. These are just the little day-to-day things. So where am I going to park? Again, maybe not an issue right now, but right now waiting in lines is definitely relevant. Being put on hold could be car problems, even just things like misplacing things, losing your keys, right? The one time you got to leave your house, where are my keys at? So these can be daily hassles. So those are the different examples of the different types of external stressors. And the question I want to ask is, how much control do you have in this situation? So are you in control? If you're in control of these things like COVID and bureaucracy and the people around you or traffic, give me a thumbs up. If you don't have very much, if any, control over these types of things, then give me a thumbs down. What do you think? Okay, so I'm seeing some thumbs down. I'm seeing the odd thumbs up. This will be interesting. Yeah, okay. Excellent. Okay, so and I have a feeling, I know sometimes maybe how people are looking at this, but yeah, so I see mostly thumbs down. Now, the other category of stressors that we're going to talk about are internal stressors. So we're going to talk about lifestyle choices, thinking patterns, and a specific type of thinking pattern called a mind trap. So what we can control is our own actions and our own thoughts. We don't really have that much control when there's a virus out there, or when a company has a certain policy. We can control how we react to that policy. We can control how we think about the new way of life with COVID-19, but we don't actually have control over that external event. So really what we can control are the internal stressors. So for the rest of the workshop, I'm going to be focusing on the internal stressors because this is really where we have the most control. So what are some of these lifestyle stressors? Well, these can be health habits. These can be decisions that we make on a daily basis, which inadvertently, typically, can cause stress in our lives. So caffeine, right? If we're drinking coffee all day and then wonder why we can't sleep at night, if we're not eating healthy, using substances, tobacco, drugs, alcohol, they can inadvertently cause us certain amounts of stress in our life. And it's kind of that double-edged sword, because often tobacco, drugs, alcohol, we look at them for coping with stress, but then they turn around and end up causing us stress when they get out of hand. Financial problems. What do you think about that one? Do you have control over financial problems? It's kind of a tricky one right now, right? Because we could say, you know what? A lot of people, right? You're not working right now. People might be laid off. You don't really have control over that situation. But what aspect of our financial situation do we have control over? We can think about, well, what are our spending habits? Are there areas where we kind of would like to spend or where we need to spend, right? We need a place to live, a roof over our head. Do we really need to order the the Starbucks coffee treat every single day, some of these extras. Do we really need that new cell phone every 12 months, or could we kind of get by with 24 months? So sometimes personal choices around finances can be a little tricky. They're not something that's always easy to change. It's really very much a lifestyle, but it's important to kind of take a look and say, okay, if I am strapped, if my financial situation is causing me stress, is there things I could do to change that situation? Same with poor work-life balance, right? Again, that can be tricky. There's a lot of jobs out there that are very demanding. Is there a way to change employers, change lines of work? So not all these lifestyle choices are easily adapted, but you do have some control over it in a way that you don't over this, for example, COVID-19. So typically when it comes to lifestyle choices, we would talk about social overextension, right? People never saying no, not making time for themselves. Right now, we're kind of in the opposite situation. We're looking at social isolation as more of a stressor. And again, that one might in this situation be something we really don't have control over because of the external environment. Another type of stressor that we do have control over that's internal is what we call negative self-talk. So self-talk refers to that voice or that, thought process inside our heads. And it's when we're very overly negative and critical towards ourselves. If we're putting ourselves down, if we're, always second guessing ourselves, analyzing, comparing ourselves to others. And this can be pretty destructive in terms of how we feel and ultimately for our stress levels if we have an ongoing negative self-talk. Actually, if I look at, that picture here of the guy, so that second picture of the guy in the ball cap, if you think about when you go to a baseball game, right, there's that heckler that's in the crowd and he's after the pitcher and, you suck, you can't do this, you can't do this. And they're really trying to get inside their head, right? Because we know that self-talk affects performance, affects ability. And, really what the message is to make sure that you're not the heckler in your own life. You're not the most critical person about what you're doing. There's lots of people out there that can be negative, but you want to make sure that you're being a cheerleader when it comes to yourself and the people around you. The other stressor that I want to talk about is the thinking pattern, so a specific type, and these were mind trap stressors. So these are specific thinking patterns that give us kind of a negative lens or a negative view of the world. So it could be having unrealistic expectations, could be over-identifying with our job title or our possession or maybe our role, could be taking things too personally, taking on other people's problems as our own. We'll talk about those last two. So what are some specific, so first we'll say, how does this tie into stress? What does paying attention to mind traps have to do with, Stressbusters? And I want to look at how does stress happen? Where does it start? So usually what we think about is we have an event or a situation, and then we label that as either stressful or unstressful. And we all kind of know what those situations might look like. So, this happens at work, right? Stress reaction. So is that the way that stress happens, or is there more to it? Well, really there's this middle step here. So every single time with any situation, we always have this middle lens or filter. And that's really how we interpret the world around us, how we process things, how we view them. And that happens at the thinking level. So a situation happens, we label it. Is this good or is this bad? We say, I can't do this, or, oh, okay, that's no problem. And then we determine if we're going to have that stress reaction. So you're driving down the road, you get a flat tire. Is that stressful or unstressful? Right? It depends. What's your lens? What's your filter? What's your previous experience? If your lens is, or your filter says, oh, I'm glad I just got CAA last week, not too bad, right? Not much of a stress reaction. If your lens or your filter is, oh my gosh, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm completely stuck. This is going to be horrible, right? That's a different type of reaction. So everybody has their own lens, filter, experience that they're going to draw from. Another classic example of this is I like to use is the roller coaster. So roller coasters, right? Those are fun. Give me a thumbs up if you're a fan of roller coasters, if you think those are fun. Give me a thumbs down if you say, no, those are not very fun. No thanks. Okay, I'm seeing Cameron's not too sure. It depends, maybe. Okay, I'm seeing a good mix. Caitlin, you've never been on one. I'm going to say that's a no. They don't sound too fun. Maybe, possibly. Okay, so our roller coaster is stressful. We can take, I'm actually a thumbs down. We can take two people and put them in the same roller coaster at the same place at the same time. So you're sitting there, our roller coaster fans, front seat, very front, right? And I'm sitting beside you and my palms are sweating, my heart rate's increasing, my blood pressure's increasing, my pupils have started to dilate, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is stressful. Now you're beside me and you're like, oh, this is awesome. I love this. It's a good rush. This is great. Our roller coaster is stressful. Well, really, what does it depend on? Depends on perception, right? It has everything to do with perception. How we perceive an event, whether it's roller coasters or a flat tire or anything else in life, depends on our perception. If we perceive it as negative, it's going to be stressful. If we perceive it as positive, it's not going to be as stressful. So really, that's something that we do have control over. If you're sitting there saying, this is fun, it's going to be great, no problem. If you're sitting there like me and saying, oh, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, I'm going to die, it's going to be a lot more stressful. So that's really what it comes back to with that stress process, that internal lens filter. And we're going to think about how this lens or filter, and we're going to talk about some specific mind traps or ways that this filter kind of gets tilted towards being more negative. If we're aware of these negative thinking patterns, we're in a much better position to do something about it. So let's take a look. So one of these mind traps is called catastrophizing. So this is when we take an everyday hassle and we turn it into a major tragedy. Okay, so yep, you're standing in line. Is that a major tragedy? Is that the end of the world, right? Is that the worst thing that could ever possibly happen? Probably not, right? But if that's what we're telling ourselves, we're probably going to be experiencing a significant amount of stress. So we want to be careful that we're not taking day-to-day inconveniences and situations and making them into a bigger catastrophe than they really need to be. Okay, so another one is called overgeneralizing. And this is when we use words like always, never, nobody, and we apply those to situations. And, especially it could be in relationships or social situations or interactions. This tends to give us a negative perspective of the world around us. So nobody in this city knows how to drive. It feels like that sometimes, but is that really true? I always have to do everything by myself, right? It might feel like I always take out the garbage, but I have to remember there's other things that other people might do around the house. You never listen, okay? Is that actually a true statement? Highly unlikely. So being careful not to overgeneralize. If you're in a conversation with someone and you really want to get them fired up, use some of these words like always, never, because you're overgeneralizing. They're not actually accurate statements, and they're really just creating more stress. Okay, another really good one is called conclusion jumping. So conclusion jumping is when something goes wrong or you're in the middle of a situation and you don't have all the facts, right? You don't know what's really happened, but you come up with an idea or what you think is true, when in fact it might not be, right? So you jump to this conclusion. And the conclusion jumping that takes place, it's not usually positive, okay? Oh, my sweetie isn't home because they're gonna pick me up flowers and dinner, right? That's not the conclusion people jump to. They haven't answered their phone, they're home, they're late, they're like, oh, what's going on? What are they doing? Who are they seeing? Something's up, right? We jump to these negative conclusions. And really, they tend to cause a lot of stress because we don't have all of the information. With our military members, I like to use the example, okay? The sergeant, you get called into the office. What's your first thought when you're getting called down? Is it positive or negative? It's negative, right? Let's be honest here. And maybe they just want to tell you that you did something well or that you did a good job. You've been picked to go on a course or a training or something like that, right? So not jumping ahead to a conclusion when we don't have all of the facts or all the information. The last one I want to talk about is called self-rating. And this is when we equate our self-worth, or we only feel good about ourselves when we get the approval from the people around us. And really what we want to ask ourselves is, do we need other people's approval or recognition to feel good, right? If you go and pull, fix the weeds out of the front lawn, or trim the trees, or do something around the house, or do something at work. And just because no one notices, does that not mean that you can't still feel good about it, right? We should be able to have self-worth that comes from internal satisfaction, not only from external resources. Self-rating is also about not expecting ourselves to be perfect, right? Especially when we know we don't expect perfection from other people. It's about giving ourselves a little bit of slack and a little bit of a break sometimes. So we've just reviewed 4 specific strategies or ways of mind traps, negative thinking patterns that people get into. So I want to check with you and tell me what you think. Is there any of these that you can relate to? Is catastrophizing something that you might do sometimes? Is it overgeneralizing? Is it jumping to conclusions? Or self-rating? Is there something that kind of is like, oh, I can recognize that one, or I think I've done that? Or maybe there's one on here that you've worked on. You're like, yeah, I know that I used to do that. I've worked on it, or I'm in the process of working on it. Okay, awesome. So I see conclusion jumping is up there, self-rating, right? Absolutely. I think we can all know that we all do these at least a little bit on different occasions, but the first step is being aware of them. Thanks for that. So if we do recognize negative thinking patterns, negative self-talk, the first thing to do is just recognize it and start to correct it, right? Start to correct that thinking error and not being negative towards ourselves. Put it into perspective, and sort of take that breath and then come up with a more positive thought. So problem solve without getting into some of those different types of mind traps. So what I'd like you to do right now is take a look. At the beginning, you made a list of your stressors. And now that we've talked about that lens or that filter, I'd like to look at your list and just see, is there any examples on your list where you have a stressor, but maybe there's a way to look at it in a slightly different light, a slightly more positive way. Maybe the situation that you're facing at work is hard or with a person, but there's an opportunity for growth or an opportunity for change, or maybe you're learning something. Maybe you're taking a course, but there's going to be something positive that comes with it. So you don't have to share, you don't have to type anything in the chat box, but I'm just going to give you 30 seconds just to think about it and reflect. Is there any opportunities to kind of shift your lens or your filter? So hopefully there was a few takeaways there, some things that you could apply based on what we talked about. So what we've just done is we've looked at thinking strategies in terms of how we manage stress. So if we come back to the goal with this workshop is to think about, Stressbusters, how can we tackle our stress? And there's actually 3 different things we're going to talk about. So we've already covered thinking strategies. Next, we'll look at action strategies, and then finally the self-management piece here. So action planning, this is really focusing on, if there is a stressor, what can we do about it? How can we handle it? Or equally, recognizing when a situation is out of our control, maybe an external stressor, and knowing when there isn't a situation where we should be taking action. So many of you have probably heard or seen this before, the serenity petition or serenity prayer. I'd like the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's really comes back to that idea of control and asking that question, do I have control over this situation? Oftentimes, we don't have 100% control either way, but there's components or sections of it that we do have control over. So what I want to talk about is what's known as the personal power grid. This was made famous by Stephen Covey in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it comes back to the control. So the first question we ask is when I have control, what we want to do is then take action. And this is described as mastery. So if I give the example, let's say you've got a test and you have control. Do you have control over the questions on the test? No. But do you have control over how well you perform? Sure, right? In many ways you do. So what are ways you could take action in order to demonstrate mastery or to be successful with your test? Well, you could study. You could review your notes. You could buy the textbook. You could attend the lectures. You could talk to the teacher or professor. You could ask your classmates what they think questions might be. Talk to someone who's previously taken that test. There's all different types of things that you could do in order to demonstrate mastery and to take control of the outcome in that situation. Now, if we have control over a situation and we just give up or we don't take action, then we call that quitting or giving up. And so with that test example, what would that look like? Well, quitting or giving up would be, I don't study, I stay up late the night before, I have lots of drugs and alcohol, I don't sleep, I show up late, I don't look at where I'm going ahead of time, don't review my notes, don't do any of these things, right? So I'm essentially quitting or giving up in that situation. Now, what about occasions where we look at it and go, you know what, I really don't have control over this situation? If that's the case, the best course of action is to practice acceptance, to say, hey, you know what, I just need to let this be. It is what it is, and accept the situation that we're in. What would be a good example here? Okay, so you know what, you need groceries. It's Friday. You got to go to the grocery store. So you get to the grocery store and there's a lineup, right? That could happen very realistically right now. And do you have control over that? Not really, right? It is what it is. You had to be there. You couldn't go earlier in the week. You couldn't go early in the morning. You had a meeting, right? So really, this is the situation that you're in. It's 2 weeks for pickup. So you just have to accept it. How would we, if we did try to take action in a situation we don't have control over, what would that look like? Well, usually it's complaining, right? If we're standing there, we can stand there in line and cross our arms and huff and puff, and we can glare at people if they almost look like they're going to bud, but really they're just, they're not. And we can talk to the people beside us and complain about how long it takes. And we can contribute immensely to the amount of stress that we're experiencing. So really, I think of the image, it's almost like hanging on. It's like a Jeep stuck in the mud. It's spinning its wheels and it's creating a big, huge mess, but it's not changing anything at all, right? It's just using a whole lot of energy, but not changing the situation. You're not getting anywhere. So if we recognize a situation where we don't have control, we want to just look at it and say, okay, I just need to breathe through it, accept it. It is what it is. You know what? Next time I'm going to plan further ahead and maybe do something differently. So what I'd like you to do then is think about what are some situations right now, and you could look at your list of stressors and say, okay, what am I doing well? Where am I taking action? Or are there some of my stressors where I could be more proactive? And are there some of the stressors on my list where actually I just need to let things go? So where are you doing well? Where are you demonstrating mastery? And what are some of the stressors where you just need to accept it and let it be the way that it is? So take about 30 seconds, look at your list and think about those options. So one of the important things that I want to look at is then if you recognize, sometimes mastery or taking action is recognizing, hey, you know what, I need to reach out for help or assistance with the situation that I'm in. So I want to talk about the Canadian Forces Members Assistance Program, also known as CIFMAP. And this is a resource that's available for all CAF members and their immediate family. So if anyone that lives with them. And basically it's free short-term problem solving or counseling, and it's available for any type of situation that you might be in. Anything that's adding stress to your life, that's taking away your focus, and whether that is personal, whether it's work-related, whether it's family, relationships, kids, partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, you name it, this resource can help. So I'm going to give a little bit more information about it. If there's parents on here, your kids would be entitled to access to it. For serving members, it's a fantastic service. So the way it works is it's provided through Health Canada, and Health Canada has a network of service providers across Canada as well as international. And what happens is what you call the number, and they're going to ask for your service number only because they need to know which organization to bill. So it's the same phone number or the same, conference center that takes all the calls. So it doesn't matter if someone works for Environment Canada, Health Canada, Revenue Canada, RCMP, if you're a veteran, everybody calls the same number. Then they take the information so they know which organization to bill. And then they say, okay, you're located in Welland, so we've got a counselor in Welland that you could see. They reach out to the counselor and say, hey, can you call private bloggins? And they'll get back to the private bloggins in the next 24 to 48 hours. And from there, they set up the appointment. At the first session, the counselor is going to take all the information and they're going to say, okay, Health Canada, I met with private bloggins. I think we're going to need 3 sessions, or maybe a more severe situation. Maybe they say, oh, I think it's going to take 5 or 6 sessions. And so Health Canada says, okay, sure, here, go ahead. And they have those sessions. So the number of sessions, I think it can be up to 20. And it's not dependent. It's not as if, oh, you're Reg Force, you get 20. You're a Class A, you only get 5. The number of sessions is just based on the severity of the issue. So oftentimes, right, people just need a check-in. 3, 4 sessions might be more than enough to address the issue. It really just depends on each case. And there's 20 sessions per issue. So maybe they start out talking about relationship issues, but there's actually maybe some underlying alcohol or drug use. So it gets a little bit deeper. They could do 20 sessions for the relationship, 20 sessions for alcohol or drug use. There's all kinds of different possibilities. So the one thing that most of our CAF members really appreciate is that it is completely separate from the military. It's not linked back to the chain of command in any way. It's not linked back to your personnel file or your medical file. It's not linked back to health services. They are completely separate. And the one thing I would say is that if you do use this resource for a service-related injury or situation, is that if it's sort of more severe or there's ongoing issues, you would want to make sure you also inform Canadian Forces Health Services, because otherwise they won't have any record of it. So down the road, maybe it ends up with a Veterans Affairs claim or ongoing PTSD. They might say, oh, when did it start? And you're like, oh yeah, I had counseling back 10 years ago. And they'd say, no, you didn't. We have nothing on this situation. So make sure you're aware that it is completely separate. There's no overlap. There is no connection to the military. It's called the Canadian Forces Members Assistance Program, but it's the Health Canada service. It's just paid for by the forces. Does anyone have any questions about the CIFMAP program? If you do, feel free to put them in the chat box. It's all of our Class A's, reservists, Reg Force, they need to know about this resource and this service. Okay, fantastic. So the last category we're going to talk about is self-management or self-care. And this is really taking care of ourselves doesn't change the stressor that we're facing, right? It doesn't change the world around us, but what it does is it makes us more able to handle the situations and the stressors that are around us. Lisa, that's a good question. Does CIFMAP include legal? Polly, do you know the answer to that? One of our people on the line here might know the answer. If you do, feel free to type it in the chat box. Okay, so self-management. So let's take a look at some of these categories. Okay, thanks, Polly. We've got no to the legal question. So in terms of fitness, one thing we want to be aware of is the DFIT website. So dfit.ca. If for any of our members, you can, and our family members, if you have a CAF connection or a CF1 card, you can access DFIT for free. And DFIT is the website that the military developed for its members for personal training, for specific trades, whether it's a force test, whether it's a personalized personalized training running program. If you want a running program to get up to doing a 5K or a 10K, the DFIT will actually develop a periodized program for you that gives you the proper increases in distance, length, speed workouts, distance workouts. It'll put everything together for you. So if you're a CAF member, all you need is your service number. You can put that in and check out the DFIT website. There's also right now the option through Connection.ca for the option to do fitness workouts and the virtual health promotion workouts, programs such as this one. So on the fitness side, every day on Facebook, there's 12 hours of programming. And if you go to CAFconnection.ca, look for the link that says virtual fitness programs starting at 7 a.m. Each base is assigned a different time period. They're providing 12 hours of programming a day. You can also check out additional health promotion webinars such as the one that we're doing right now by going to CAF Connection. Now, what about sleep? Anybody have some ideas here? Feel free to jump in the chat box. What are some things that you should avoid 2 hours before bed if you want to improve the quality of your sleep? Coffee, definitely, right? Screen time can be an issue, that blue light for sure. Oh, Jen, good. So we have eating, drinking, caffeine. I think we've got the full list here. Well done. There, we got exercise. I think that was the last one. So certainly caffeine, right? We know depending on your sensitivity, it's not necessarily good to have caffeine. Joanne, I think you're right. COVID news, that does not help your sleep. Alcohol. Now, a lot of people say, oh, but you know what? Alcohol helps me sleep, right? I hit the pillow and I fall asleep. And that very well is true. But we also know that alcohol interrupts our REM sleep, or our rapid eye movement sleep. So yes, you fall asleep easier, but you don't get the same quality of sleep. So that's an important one to be aware of. Nicotine as well. So nicotine is a stimulant that can impact people's sleep. And lastly, exercise. I would agree. Someone said, with food, if you are hungry, it can be better to have a snack. It really depends on the individual. So some of these things you kind of have to know your body. What point does my cutoff for caffeine? If I eat certain foods, will it keep me awake, or will it actually help me sleep better if I'm not hungry? So with these lifestyle choices, we've talked about ways to take care of ourselves, but also recognizing when lifestyle choices are having a negative impact, when we're coping, whether it's using gambling to cope, using alcohol, cannabis, some of these substances were with coping methods. And really what we want to take away is, if we recognize we're using a substance to cope or to change the way that we feel, is it can be a slippery slope. Because what we know is that, once that alcohol wears off in the morning, our problems haven't gone away, they haven't changed. We still have the financial stressor or the relationship stressor. And typically it even can exacerbate the problem. So now, you slept in, you're late for work, or you didn't pick someone up on time. So now that relationship is even more strained. We also know that over time, if we're using things like, whether it's alcohol or cannabis, or even things like gambling, whatever it is that we're using to cope, over time, it takes more and more of that substance or that effect, that high, to get the same impact, right? So alcohol. Right? Before, maybe you're just having a 6-pack. Well, now it's going to be 8, and then it's 12, and then it's 15, just to get that same effect. So it can be a slippery slope. Be careful with recognizing and be mindful that if you're using substances to change the way that you feel. So basically, to wrap it up, we've talked about 3 different types of strategies. We've talked about thinking strategies in terms of how we manage stress. We've looked at action planning, right? And recognizing, do I have control? Do I need to just deal with the situation? Or is it a situation where I need to practice acceptance? And we've looked at how can I best take care of myself so that I'm physically, mentally, emotionally able to handle the stressors that I'm under. And it's sort of looking at having a full toolbox. So we don't want to, fix everything in our house by taking a hammer to it. I certainly wouldn't recommend that. Same thing in life, right? We can't always just rely on going for a run. Yes, it's great, but we want to make sure that you have a full set of tools, all kinds of different strategies for tackling the stress that we're facing. This is my reminder here to post the resources, the handout. So I will just pull that up here. resources handout. So I'm going to share this now. So if you're interested in any of these phone numbers, I think next time around, actually the family information line is on there. So that number that Kim typed in the chat box, thank you. And that phone number is also on this handout. That's a great resource for family members, as Kim mentioned. So you can take this handout here. It's got a few other things that are attached to it as well. It's got the information for the CAF Members Assistance Program and for the Mental Health Continuum Model. Okay, so there's the resources. And I've got a few polls that I want to do just to kind of wrap things up. So one, I would like just a little bit of feedback. This isn't going to be shared, but if you don't mind giving me some feedback on, do you feel you can apply what you learned today in your daily life? Oh, so I have strongly agreed twice. I have a typo. Well done, Amy. There is no strongly disagree. There's only strongly agree, disagree, neither agree or disagree, agree and strongly agree. I think this is maybe compromised the poll here. Is that my subconscious? Yeah, so that's, I'm not sure if you can change your answer, but if you disagree, you can pick that one. Okay, so my bad on that one. I can tell I'm blushing and turning red. That's funny. Okay, so, and my last question is, how satisfied are you with the Demio platform? What's your feedback on that? So I'll give you a few moments just to fill that out. Does anybody have any questions right now? Feel free to jump in the chat box. So last but not least, then, we do have our Facebook page for PSP Southwestern Ontario. Feel free to find us on there. You can also find me and send a friend request to Amy DHP. Thank you, everybody, very much for participating. You're welcome to stay on if you have any questions. If not, that's the end of our workshop. And I really appreciate everyone's participation, interaction. It makes it so much more fun for me to kind of get a sense of the audience that we have here. So thank you very much. Joanne said you missed a lot. They are putting together a YouTube channel, so there will be some of these online, and there is more workshops on Connection.ca. Every week there's more workshops, so feel free to check those out. Thanks, everybody. Okay, take care. I'm logging off. Have a great night.